So, watering. How do how often do I water? How, too much, too
Yeah.
little, that sort of thing.
I think if there's one thing you need to know about caring for container crops, it's watering. And you don't want to get this wrong. Consistent, deep watering is essential to the health of your container crops, especially crops like tomatoes and peppers, which are prone to things like blossom end rot, which is a physiological condition that happens. Like the fruits will form these leathery, kind of brownish, black, grayish patches in the bottom of the fruits. Doesn't look appealing or appetizing, and really it takes away from the eating quality of the fruit. So you don't want that to happen, but that happens. It's not a disease. It's not caused by a pest. It's caused by inconsistent watering. The plants need calcium to grow and produce those fruits. And the calcium is basically pushed off the plants and through the tips and into the flowers and the fruits through water. But if you're not watering consistently, that water is not getting all the way into the plant like it should. Especially if you let your tomatoes or your peppers wilt in the summer sun, if they get to the point of wilting, damage has already occurred. So you want to make sure you water so that they don't wilt at all, which probably means watering every day. Weather like we're having right now, which has been kind of wet, maybe every 2 days. On really hot summer days, maybe in the morning and in the evening, you might have to water twice. I do also mulch around my tomato in containers, my tomato plants, because that helps hold the soil moisture and reduces the risk of wilting. So consistent watering is key. Don't water lightly. Water so deeply that the water comes out the bottom of the pot, I think is really important. If it's a fabric pot that doesn't have drainage holes, it'll still weep out the bottom. Don't worry about that. But water deeply, water consistently, mulch if you can. And yeah, that's the most important thing to remember.
I was going to ask you, because I mulch with mine because I mulch everything. It makes sense on the ground, so it makes sense with that. And it's good that you point out, you go on any Facebook garden group and someone will show a picture of blossom end rot tomato and said, what is this and what do I do? And everybody said they'll either say put calcium tablets in the ground
or Epsom salts.
Or Epsom salts. Let's add salt. Let's add salt to this equation.
Eggshells aren't going to do it. Like people will tell you, crush up eggshells, put it in your containers. That's got calcium. Sure does, but it's not going to get to your plants anytime soon.
Maybe in 1,000 years.
Yeah. And your soil is generally not calcium deficient, so it's not that you're calcium deficient. It's the watering. And when you do water too, and I'm sure you do this, Greg, in your garden beds as well. Water the soil. Like I'm not standing there spraying the top of my tomato plants, letting the water run down. That could spread disease. So I water the soil, not the plant.
Yeah, since I've got you on here, and this is a general gardening question. If I have so sometimes I'll grow my tomatoes directly in the ground, so direct seed them and everything in like, sort of temporary cold frame type deal. This year I bought seeds to do that, but I just kept putting it off, and now it's June. So I just went and bought some at Bloom, actually.
Nice.
It's a great place,
I love don't get me started about Bloom.
Yeah. So anyway, when I stuck all my tomatoes in the ground, I just this year I said I picked off all the blossoms, because I thought those blossoms probably form when it's unlikely that a plant that's 1.5 feet tall, that's in like a coffee mug's worth of soil, is probably getting the calcium that's needed to those. It's unlikely unless they're supplementing it. So I figured those blossoms are probably no good anyway. So I just picked them all off. Is that a good idea when you're planting out a transplant? That's flowered in the pot.
I try to grow my tomato transplants. I start most of my own. I do buy some, of course, because I happen upon varieties I'm not growing, and then I'm like, But I try to buy ones that don't have flowers on them already. Doesn't always happen. So in that case, I would pick off those flowers. But I mean, garden centers fertilize almost every day. Pretty much every time they water, there's a little bit of fertilizer in there going to those plants. So it's probably okay blossom end rot wise, as long as they haven't been allowed to wilt, which if it's at a big box store, they probably have. But at independent garden centers, usually they're pay attention, of course, to watering really, really well. So that should be fine. But yeah, I do pick off the blossoms before I plant them. And I also pick off the bottom leaves, and I plant the plants deeply, right? I know you do as well, but I plant them as, at least half the stem, if not 2/3 of the stem gets buried. And that just helps produce a more robust root system, whether in a container or a garden bed.
Yes. Well, speaking of roots and nutrients and such, fertilizing. I'm sure this is probably the one. I mean, there's probably 2 ways people kill their potted plants. They water it too much, they don't water it enough, or they fertilize it too much. Probably fertilize it too much more than not enough.
Yeah.
So Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. What I mean, so you've got your potting soil. Often it has some sort of
Yeah.
slow release fertilizer in it. So when do you start supplementing the fertilizer that's actually in the potting medium, and to what extent?
Well, I probably should have mentioned this early on, but usually when I'm growing vegetables in containers, I mix the potting mix with compost too. So it's like, 2/3 potting mix, 1/3 compost. So I should have said that earlier. So my soil already has some organic matter with nutrients in there because I've got that compost going. And then I usually add a slow release organic vegetable fertilizer in there too. Something that'll break down slowly over the coming months. Every time you water, release a little bit of nutrients. So that kind of sets you off right. So that's what I do to begin with my containers. And then during the growing season, every couple of weeks, probably every 3 weeks or whenever I remember, I will get out my liquid fish seaweed fertilizer, add a bit to a watering can, and I will water that into the soil as well. So I try to fertilize every couple of weeks just to give things a boost in containers, because unlike in-ground gardens and plants, they don't have the option of mining for nutrients. So I like to give them that little bit of fish and seaweed fertilizer, something, a liquid quick shot to help give them that little quick fix and help them grow. Because once your plants are growing, your vegetable plants, you want them to keep growing steadily. You don't want them to all of a sudden, be starving for nutrients and kind of slow their growth. You want them to keep growing consistently and quickly so they can put out fresh growth and produce a really nice harvest. So fertilizing regularly, I think, is key to success. I would recommend using a liquid fertilizer to supplement, at least up until probably mid-August, a couple weeks,
Right.
at least maybe a month before your frost date, and that'll help keep things going all season long.
All right, that all makes sense, because you're in the pot, you're mimicking the soil condition. The soil condition, it has organisms that are breaking down organic matter, and
Yeah.
nutrients are constantly being released into the soil, and your plants can take it up. And in the pot, you haven't really got that happening to anyway, at least to the same extent. So your supplement. So just to speak to that, I mean, so you said you're fertilizing, but my guess is that you're putting a fairly weak amount of fertilizer, like just a little bit in. It's always being added, but not a huge treatment. You're just putting a
Yeah.
little.
Yeah. So generally, I mean, it depends on the product, and there's so many products, so I can't
Yes.
recommend an application rate, obviously. But often I will dilute it by half, So
Right.
if it's like add 1 tablespoon per gallon, then I will go what half of that.
Yes.
And that way I know I'm not overfeeding, but I'm still giving them that nice little boost of fertilizer. And then sometimes for things like long-term vegetables like tomatoes that are in the garden for so long, I will do a foliar spray of just like liquid kelp. We have Sea Boost here in Nova Scotia, which is a great product, a seaweed product. And I spray that on the leaves, and within a day or two they just turn deeper green. It's amazing to see the difference, and you literally can visually see the difference. And that's always good, because liquid kelp seaweed fertilizers are really high in micronutrients and plant hormones. So I always think they're a great thing to apply to things like tomato plants, but too much too often can be too much. So I don't usually do like a foliar of liquid kelp more than, say, every 4 to 6 weeks. More than that, it can actually be a growth retardant and slow down the growth of plants. So
Really?
follow directions on the package. Read before you apply them to your plants, for sure.
I've never used that stuff. I should look
Oh,
into
really?
that. Yeah, and
Oh, it's
I'm
good.
unbelievably unproactive in my garden. So yeah, neat
Yeah.
thing to do an experiment where you do half of them with it and half of them without. And then
Yeah.
you can see, like, look
You
at those
totally can
ones.
see the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sounds really
Yeah.
cool.
Get some Sea Boost and see what happens.
Yeah. I think I'll look into that. Yeah, I'll write that down.